Since I like going back and listening to my old thoughts, I'm currently in the process of re-uploading some of my older videos in order to make them more compliant with YouTube's policies on reused content. But since I didn't want to do a lot of editing, here is the audio from my original review for this movie.
I will always love Leigh Whannell for having a hand in creating Saw. To me, that film is the epitome of what an original low-budget horror movie should be like, even if the sequels eventually spun out of control. Still looking forward to Spiral though. So even though I admittedly don't love all of Whannell's work as a director/storyteller, I'll always be interested in seeing whatever film he is working on. Which is why I was curious to check out The Invisible Man, regardless of Universal's awful attempts at making a cinematic monsters universe. This is the negative effects of having Marvel as one of the most successful studios right now. Everyone wants to borrow their shared cinematic approach. Universal tried to launch their own Monsterverse or Dark Universe several times in just the past decade. Johnny Depp was originally supposed to play the Invisible Man in some sort of blockbuster where I assume he was eventually going to fight Angelina Jolie's Bride of Frankenstein, Tom Cruise's Mummy, Russell Crowe's Mr. Hyde, and maybe even Luke Evans' Dracula. That sounds awful. Thankfully, Whannell was wise enough to take the Blumhouse approach and make a film on a smaller scale that focuses on the characters of the story at hand. Trapped in a violent and controlling relationship with wealthy optics scientist Adrian Griffin, Cecilia decides to disappear and runs away from her abusive partner. With the help of her sister and a childhood friend, Cecilia successfully goes into hiding, until she hears the disturbing news that Adrian has taken his own life. But after a series of coincidences that start turning lethal, Cecilia begins to suspect that Adrian's death was a hoax, and that she is being haunted by someone that nobody can see. And that makes The Invisible Man a film about domestic abuse instead of being a monster movie. Which, to me, is far more interesting because it makes the film about something that's actually monstrous. Abusive relationships are real. Chances are we all know somebody who has been or is currently in an abusive or toxic relationship. The psychological, emotional, and physical damage that an abuser can inflict on a victim is tangible. So for a movie about an invisible man running around and stalking people, this film is actually quite grounded in something that is truly horrifying. There are no monsters here, at least in the traditional sense. There are no werewolves or mummies or super powerful alter egos, just real people capable of doing real and monstrous things. So the scares in this film are super effective. There are moments in this movie where I was legitimately scared because the horror of the scenes felt genuine, as if they could happen to me or any of my friends in real life. I'm sure none of us want to see what a control freak is capable of when they snap. And I have to give kudos to Whannell here for filming the movie in such a way that keeps the audience constantly fearful of someone they actually can't see. The camera work is incredible. Our brains know that an invisible man isn't physically in the room with the actors involved, but the way the camera moves or halts, or pans around the room, or just lingers on for a second or two too long, suggests to us that someone is actually there. And that feeling of believing you're being watched is incredibly uncomfortable. The sound design aids with creating that unnerving atmosphere as well. The music and sound design in any horror film can help build the suspense of a scene, but The Invisible Man just nailed this technical aspect. The music is already quite eerie, but when it stops, and there is complete and total silence in a room, you can't help but find yourself just listening, waiting to hear someone you can't see take a step, make a creaking sound, or simply take a breath. When you're so laser focused on trying to find this mysterious presence, that's when the film will hit you with a genuine scare. And I thought it was just an incredibly clever way for Whannell to build tension, because what's scarier than something you can't actually see? The very concept of being alone, but not feeling alone, is very frightening. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Elizabeth Moss now. I'm not really familiar with her work, but everyone seems to love whatever she's been in, and I can see why. She's remarkably good in this film. She has to sell you on the fact that she is being traumatized by an entity that we know doesn't physically exist, and she does such a phenomenal job of doing so. Think about it. There are moments where Moss has to fight someone who isn't there. In the hands of a lesser actor, these scenes could have been very comical and cheesy, but they are not. This is not a fun horror movie. It's a realistic one. And Moss's character is clearly troubled, restless, and filled with anxiety. You can't help but feel for her. Even if we don't know the full story behind what Adrian did to her, we can tell that Cecilia has been through some shit. So it's a shame that Moss's performance will likely be overlooked later on this year, simply because this is a horror movie that came out in February. The other actors in the film are fine. The cast is pretty much comprised of unknown actors, and while they are solid, they just pale in comparison to Moss. But I did very much enjoy the place Cecilia's friends had in this narrative. They want to help her, obviously, but they sometimes have to question her sanity. And that's understandable. We all would like to believe that we would help out our friend in need, but in reality, we would probably think Cecilia was insane too if she told us that she was being stalked by an invisible man. I'm sure that there are instances where we all thought someone was going crazy for a lot less than that. So not only do I empathize with Cecilia's character, but I also see where the people around her are coming from. Shit, there were moments where I had to question whether or not Cecilia was going crazy. The film does a great job with perspective. Audience members are a lot more attentive and unforgiving these days than they used to be. Any little detail or any unexplained story beat will immediately be scrutinized in a video essay on YouTube. So I thought it was wise for Winnell to modernize the story of the Invisible Man. I never read the book, so I don't know how Griffin turns invisible in the original source material, but in this film, I love that the invisibility aspect is grounded in technology. It's not magic or something that goes fully unexplained. There's a science fiction-y aspect to it. And in a world where we're flooded by superhero films that also try to ground themselves in technology and science, I thought this was a neat little twist. It felt like I was watching the origin story of a supervillain. What if someone like Iron Man was a sociopathic stalker? So The Invisible Man is not just a good horror film, it is also a thoughtful and insightful one. It recognizes the real horror of domestic abuse, how it can be all-encompassing, and how it can affect one's sense of reality. Real toxic relationships are all too common, so check up on your friends even before you start to see warning signs, and don't give up on them when they seem anxiety-ridden. Believing you deserve to be treated in a negative way is not healthy. This is what horror films should strive to be like. The Invisible Man is not just a movie with a silly monster of the week. It is a genuinely good film that addresses important social issues. Hopefully, Universal has learned this lesson and they'll stop trying to force a shared cinematic universe upon us, even if The Invisible Man does leave enough room open for a potential sequel. But sequel potential never gets in the way of the story being told. The Invisible Man has a tightly focused narrative under the vision of a singular director. Thanks to Elizabeth Moss's fantastic performance and the very clever direction, The Invisible Man is not only my new favorite project by Leigh Whannell, but it is also probably one of my favorite horror movies ever. I was fully invested in Cecilia's storyline. I felt just as paranoid and anxious and fearful as our protagonist, and there are certain moments in the film that genuinely shook me to my core. I was disturbed and sincerely scared. What more could I ask for out of a horror film? So I would likely give The Invisible Man 4.25 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching.